sort of like Roger Shepard-esque sort of 3D shape. The other one is where you actually see the 3D shape rotating, and when you're actually imagining doing it, your motor cortex lights up. Okay? So I'm always going on about, just because some area lights up doesn't in itself tell you anything. Well, in this particular case, it can tell you something. Okay? It can say, yes, the imagery is actually reactivating the same areas, but usually weaker. And the alternative view was, it doesn't need to. I mean, there's kind of no reason. We talked about this a little bit when you see a black and white picture of a banana, and yellow, decodable yellow meaning activation actually happens in your visual cortex. It's a very interesting question why that should happen, because your brain really doesn't need to do that, maybe, right? If there's some little checkbox higher up that says, yeah, it's yellow, why bother going in and sort of neurally coloring in your visual cortex yellow? I mean, you're not giving yourself any extra information. Same for motor cortex. If you just say, yep, I'm imagining, if some, abstract sort of propositional content area says, yep, I'm imagining moving my hand, why bother activating? There's probably some important reason. I mean, there are theories about this. Anyway, so the answer is that imagery really does activate the same areas, but a bit weaker. This raises all kinds of interesting questions. For instance, how do you stop yourself from hallucinating, right? If I imagine that I'm seeing, pink elephant over there, right? And that activates some of the same regions and circuits that would be activated if I really did see a pink elephant. I better not activate them too much, or I'll just hallucinate that I'm seeing a pink elephant. Well, what does too much mean? Right? What if I catch a little glimpse of a pink elephant, or I see a pink elephant in low light or through sunglasses or something? I might get sort of weak pink elephant activation.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt, but
No, please do not hate to interrupt. Please, it's not interrupting. The more questions, the better. In fact, please hate not to interrupt.
No. But so I don't know if you've seen this, because I know you scour the internet for these like science for the things that they post, and you always know about these cool articles.
No, I don't always know.
Well, at least that's how I.
Well, anyway,
that's how I perceive it to be. Anyways, so there is this study. Admittedly, I haven't read it, but there was this guy who had
You haven't read it? I'm shocked.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
He had a terribly intractable epilepsy. Okay. And so
okay.
they had to do some surgery to treat that, and they did some. They did a physiological ECOG before they did the surgery.
Okay.
Okay, and they found they were trying to localize maybe some of the areas where the. And so he found that he was having these interesting, interesting not for him but scientifically interesting, hallucinations where he would imagine sort of the subway station near his house.
Oh yeah, really? I didn't see this.
And so they found that when they stimulate, for instance, parahippocampal gyrus, which seems to be involved in processing scenes, and
that's a perfect segue to this Adrian Arnold.
Right, and so he would, and he was having, when they stimulated that area in ventral temporal cortex, he was hallucinating and perceiving, seeing that environment. The experience.
Interesting, and he would get the same hallucinations from his epileptic fits and
exactly.
stuff. Interesting. Well, so there you go. So if you have a strong activation in these areas, it really can make you hallucinate. And a weak activation seems to be more like imagery. But is there some kind of cutoff, or is it a different type of activation, or you can get weak activation just by looking at a low contrast image, but that doesn't mean that looking at a low contrast image is the same thing as hallucinating a high contrast image, right? Or imagining a high contrast image. It is very difficult and interesting question. Anyway. But the key point is that imagery activates these same areas. So here's a motor example. So when you ask somebody to imagine playing tennis, okay, it's going to literally activate their motor, or in fact more their premotor. Premotor is just a sort of supplement, extra motor area. And Frank very nicely segued into this other option that they had, which is, what if you imagine navigating through, walking through your home, or navigating through a city, okay? So, we've seen some of these sort of faces versus houses example. There is this area called the parahippocampal place area, it's often referred to, that is probably involved in lots and lots of different things, but one thing that it's definitely involved in is representing sort of scenes and navigating through scenes. And in fact, the hippocampus is very important for navigation. It's been shown in rats as things called place cells. That's the whole story. Okay, so these were their two mental imagery tasks. And this sort of answers, we'll start to answer Adam's question about, how do we actually know which one means yes and which one means no? So these are the sort of scary brain images that I was mentioning. Okay, I find these a little bit scary. Okay, so I mean, look at this poor guy, right? I mean, these are people who had, like horrible car accidents and stuff. I mean, it's amazing that they're alive. Okay, I mean, these people would not have been alive just a few years ago. Or look at this person here. There's just like an enormous piece of their brain just missing, and you could actually, you may not recall this from the video, but some of these people have extremely large ventricles. Like this person has really large ventricles. The ventricles shouldn't be that big in a healthy brain. So these are people with, really, really, really bad brain injuries. Okay, and this is a normal healthy person here. So this activation here is the sort of motor imagery. They're imagining playing tennis. And this activation here around the sort of hippocampus, this is you're imagining navigating a city or walking through your home. And the key point about these is these are good, clear, robust activations, and they're really far away from each other. Okay? So from a neuroscience point of view, in terms of like increasing our understanding of subtle representation of information or signals or something like that, this is an incredibly well-established and well-known result. Right? This has been known for a long time. Okay? So you've got imagery activates similar stuff to the real perception. Place, environment, navigation stuff activates hippocampally type areas. Motor stuff activates premotor type areas. People have known that forever. So without any extra, well not forever, but for let's say 15 years. Okay? So without any extra, sort of deep solving of any great mystery of the brain, they said, hang on a minute, we can use this as a communication device, right? That was the insight, right? But it's a sort of, I don't even know what the right label is for that kind of insight. It's not the same insight as solving some mystery of neural representation. It's figuring out a really clever and important and consequential way of using stuff that you already know. So this is, reason number 500 why something that would seem like a very kind of, quote unquote basic question is actually may have great consequences, right? So there were probably people who kind of thought about this and like, that's not interesting enough, who cares, okay? This is A, scientifically interesting, and B, impacting the lives of lots of people. By the way, this came out in New England Journal of Medicine, which is the sort of science and nature of medicine. So anyway, so these are, so to answer the question of, how can you say yes or no, I don't know if you can read this. Okay, this is just showing, oh look, here's someone with enormous ventricles. I don't know what has happened to this person's brain. It says in the paper if you want to look it up. But this person's brain is very, very, very severely atrophied. Okay? And yet, if you ask this person, please imagine walking through walking through your home, you get reliable, sustained, that's the key point of this picture, sustained throughout the entire duration of the time when you said, please imagine this, okay? Sustained activation in this area. So that's a good, clean signal. That's a good, clean signal from a really messed up brain. Okay? And the great thing is, so there's two different signals here, okay? So there's one, imagine that you're playing tennis, and there's one, imagine you're walking through the house. So that's how you can have yes or no. First of all, you get somebody to, well, first of all, you do it in normal people, and you show that you can actually get strong imagery signals. They'd already done that. Then you take the people who, have these brain injuries and who are in this quote-unquote vegetative state, and you say, I want you to imagine moving your arm, playing tennis, I want you to imagine walking through your house. And if they can produce these good, strong, reliable, sustained signals, then you say, aha, now I have a communicative tool. Okay? So then they do the communication scans. Okay, so here's the communication scans. So you probably can't read this text from here. Is your father's name Alexander? If you want to say yes, imagine you're playing tennis. Okay? And there's an important control here, which they mention in the paper, that the experiment of the people who, they deliberately pick questions which the people who were like, looking at the brain images and asking the questions did not actually know whether the father's name was Alexander, or in this case, do you have any brothers? Did not know whether the person had any brothers, because otherwise you could easily sort of accidentally pollute the readings. Although these results are so clear that it would actually be kind of hard to pollute them. And this is, by the way, what I meant when I said that if they'd done something really sort of subtle and seemingly more sophisticated, it would actually be much less believable. So, there's a nice phrase that people say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So they're making the extraordinary claim that these people who have been, completely unresponsive to the outside world for many, many years, that there's actually something going on inside. So they better have some pretty clear evidence. Now if you say, we did a scan and we entered 30,000 voxels into some fancy classifier and we were able to predict with 70% accuracy whether they got this or not, you would say, that's nice. But I don't know if I really believe that there's really something going on inside this person. Okay? They didn't do that at all. Okay? They said, we've got these two really simple tests that produce really strong, robust activation in two completely different parts of the brain, even when your brain is as, it literally, if you've looked at enough brains, you can't look at a brain like this without feeling a little bit queasy. Okay? It feels like, it's like, these are really, really messed up brains. Not these two. You're probably thinking these brains look fine. These are the controls on this side. In case you're wondering, I don't see what's wrong with these two brains. Okay. So there's nothing fancy going on here, which is actually kind of why it's so good, in my view, and other people's views, and in the views of the New England Journal of Medicine. Okay. So question? No. Please, more questions about it. Well, I'm going to have some questions for everyone in a minute. So anyway, so this is how you can actually do the communication. And then, that wasn't in this paper, but then, you saw on the TV show, they asked the person, are you in pain? That's kind of that. Just imagine for a minute, what must it actually have felt like? I mean, if you want to go talk to Adrian Owen, he's only like, a few miles away, you can go talk to him. What must it actually have felt like to, to ask that question? It must have felt kind of, what must it have felt like to answer that question? For the guy who's actually in the scanner, who has not had any communication with any human being, right, for years and years, ever since they had some terrible, traffic accident or whatever it was, okay? So, it must have been kind of, and if you want to see, by the way, some of the, sort of more emotional, what this means to their families and stuff, there is an hour-long documentary about it that is on the web called The Mind Reader, which, is, in this case, it's actually maybe a reasonable title, maybe not. Okay, but anyway, that's what it's called. You can Google for it if you want. So let's talk about some of these questions, because I think this is kind of interesting to think about. So, and by the way, there are not necessarily clear answers and well-defined answers to these questions. So this is not like a right or wrong kind of thing. I'm just curious to hear what you guys think, because these are becoming quite hotly debated questions, precisely because this raises really difficult problems, right? The fact that, these people were well looked after in the first place, right? They wouldn't have even gotten this study if they were well looked after. But now the families of people who've engaged in this, 20% of these families have now discovered that their loved one who's in this, hospital is actually trying to communicate, but can only do it when they're wheeled into an fMRI scanner, or maybe there's other ways of doing that, something they're looking at in a minute, okay? So if a patient reliably responds to these questions, does that mean that they're conscious? What do you guys think? And there is no clear right or wrong answer to this. There's actually quite a funny interview with Adrian Owen. I was just looking on the web for some of the stuff, and so he was got he's in a question and answer session in front of a bunch of people, and the interviewer says, "Okay, let's start with an easy question first. What is consciousness?" And Adrian Owen was like, "Oh, well, that's kind of a difficult question, but here's some thoughts on it." So, what is consciousness? So that's kind of a difficult question, but here's at least a sub-question of that. If the patient does respond reliably to the question, does that mean they're conscious? What do you think? Yeah.
I think it's a pretty strong indicator that they have some level of consciousness.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So, but it's very, very difficult to know. It's so, people always say, oh, this is a great study because it raises more questions than answers. But this study really does raise a lot of questions. Okay. So, Yeah, I mean, it definitely means they can follow instructions, right? But does it mean that, you know, I mean, you could imagine this sort of inner voice saying, oh, I'm free, I'm communicating, I'm finally unlocked, I'm speaking, yes, I can, you know, but that might not be going on, right? It might be like, am I half awake? I don't know, I'm playing tennis, you know, why am I playing this? I don't know, right? It's very, very hard to know, right? But there's definitely something going on, right? Now, saying there's something going on is kind of a vague statement, but but it's reliable, it's repeatable, you know, they can truthfully answer questions where there are right or wrong answers, like do you have any brothers, but the experimenter doesn't know the answer to that. So something's going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, they have an inner life in the way that we have an inner life, whatever that means, right? It's difficult. If a patient does not respond reliably to the questions, does that mean that they're not conscious? Yeah. Fine.
I have a question about the first statement.
Yeah.
Has anyone proposed a model in which maybe like these kinds of responses might be reflective of the same kind of instinct of just like, you know, like tickling and then, you know, just, you know,
That's a very interesting question. Well, so you know, so one thing that people showed like a long time ago is that, for instance, and people were saying, you know, like, you know, people debate, and, you know, are animals conscious and things like this. So you can have, say, a dog whose entire cerebral cortex has been removed, but who will still kind of, you know, whine and cower in fear if, you know, if somebody sort of like comes and kicks it or something, right? It's not a very nice experiment to do, but people have done this kind of stuff back in the day, okay? So that shows that whatever is driving, you know, whatever is driving this sort of fear response in the dog, it's not some higher level cognition, right? Because, you know, you've literally removed like the entire sort of higher level part of the brain. And a lot of sort of low level reflex stuff can actually, you know, drive responses. That's why the person, you know, like if you tickle, I don't know about tickle, but certainly if you sort of prod them, they might move away their hand or something. And maybe tickle too, you can look into it. And I don't know if you guys remember, there was this whole controversy about a person, I think in Florida, called Terri Schiavo. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. Okay, so there was a person who, it subsequently, they hadn't done these kind of studies on Terri Schiavo, but there were people who were saying, no, she's conscious, she's aware, she knows what's going on, because I think occasionally she'd sort of like, you know, shout or flail or something like that. And the question is, well, you know, that shouting or flailing might just be some sort of reflex action. So that's one of the things that's nice about this study, is it sort of gets around that by having a very controlled setup. So, you know, nobody's going and prodding them. They're in a scan and they're just hearing words over a microphone, over the speakers, right? And the words are, you know, quite cognitive level things. Imagine playing tennis. Imagine walking through a house. If you have brothers, you know, if you have any brothers, to answer yes. Do you have any brothers? To answer yes, imagine playing tennis. To answer no, imagine walking through the house. Okay. So whatever's driving that, it's some process that must be able to cognitively understand fairly complex questions and instructions. Okay, so it's much higher level than, you know, if you poke them, they might move. But it's a difficult question. So in fact, you know, they're doing more studies than the ones I just showed you here. But that's one of the crucial questions. You know, how high level does it go, and how rigorously can you show it? Because you definitely don't want to be, and they've taken great pains to do this. You don't want to be in a situation where, you know, you're sort of over reading into the situation. And you know, by having this very controlled setup of sort of, you know, reliably producing sustained responses to just spoken words. It's not, for instance, like, you know, you have to be careful, for instance, not to sort of like speak a bit louder and, you know, shout a bit like, okay, play tennis, or, you know, walk through your house or something, where some kind of low-level thing, like how loud you're talking. So, you know, the instructions are given by this like pre-recorded voice and stuff like that. I mean, in the video, partly for dramatic effect, but also partly because, you know, they do that for like piloting purposes. You know, it was the person talking into the mic, which might have potential problems, but you could kind of actually tell in the video that the actual instructions are given in a more controlled way. But yeah, it's a difficult problem. So and this sort of, you know, segues to the second problem. What if they don't respond to the questions? Does that mean that they're not conscious? What do you think about that?
No.
I didn't. It was.
I'm
I'm sure what you all said made a lot of sense. I just couldn't hear it.
I said no.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Okay, and why would that be?
Absence of evidence is not evidence
Yeah.
of absence.
I literally-
Okay. That's a good. Okay, that's definitely true. Well, give me a hypothesis as to something that might underlie them not responding.
Their language comprehension is messed up, however.
Right, exactly.
But that's not what consciousness is.
Yeah, exactly. Or they might just, they might not be able to hear.
Yeah.
Right? Or they might have fallen asleep at that moment. Or
Yeah.
something. In fact, this is actually a very general problem of any kind of task ever, that there's always 100 reasons why you can fail at a task. So, in fact, especially if you ever look at, a study of, some impaired group versus some normal group, usually what you find is that the impaired group does worse on the task than the normal group. And so the experimenters have to, and they usually do lots of different controls to make it clear that, and this is worth thinking about in your projects too, to make it clear that the reason why people are doing badly on this task is the interesting reason that we happen to care about, and not one of these many, many uninteresting reasons that we don't care about very much, right? Because, you think, oh, we're researching consciousness. We're going to ask questions to people and find out if they're conscious or not. So if they don't ask it, that must be something to do with the thing we're asking about, right? Well, no, it might be that, your mic's broken, or, their, their auditory cortex is damaged so they can't hear, or, something like that. In fact, it was actually a very common thing for a very long time that, for instance, people who were deaf-mute were thought to have no mental life, right? Until I think people like Ian Keller came along, right? You were like, oh, well, this person, I can talk to them, shout at them, they don't have any idea what's going on, they don't say anything, they must just be idiots. But no, they're not necessarily. So, okay, this is getting even more philosophical. And these brain responses are a form of behavior. Well, it depends what you mean by behavior, right? But bear in mind that for a long time, okay, this is not an exaggeration to say that the dominant, approach in psychology, say prior to World War II, prior to around 1950s, was behaviorism, which would have said, it would be very interesting to resurrect like B.F. Skinner or John Watson or someone and say, what do you guys think about this? That would be a difficult study to do. But it would be very interesting because philosophically, they would be kind of obliged to say that what is going on here doesn't make sense. I mean, of course, they didn't have the option of doing this brain reading, but I don't know. I think I may be being unfair, but I think they would have to say this entire project is conceptually ill-founded or something.
I don't know if that's.
I don't know. That might not be fair.
Because I think they were just they were more concerned about the mind, not the brain. So they agreed that the brain does things.
Well,
and that it's sort of a cascade of behavior. So I think they would call things that happen in the brain behavior.
Maybe, but bear in mind that the question that's being asked here is, are these people conscious?
Oh, yeah,
right?
that they would think is totally
and it's actually a true
Yeah.
statement, and forget behaviorism, like pre-1950s, it's a true statement that for a long time it was considered naive and foolish to try and study consciousness. And that was true until, I don't know, like maybe the 80s or something, okay? And in fact, some people still consider it naive. And, some people who are naive and foolish study consciousness, but some people who are naive and foolish can study anything. But it's not the case that, but it is the case that people do beautiful and well-controlled studies of consciousness, such as this one. And for a long time, I think it's fair to say that, maybe pre-80s or maybe even 90s, good luck to you submitting a grant saying, I'm going to study consciousness. They would have said, forget it. So it's not delving into ancient history to look at that. Anyway, so there's it's like, can this be extended? So more neuroscientific questions, can this be extended beyond yes/no questions? They're working on that. You might imagine that some sort of higher order decoding would be important for that. How would that work? There's interesting ethical questions. If you're interested, there's now an entire branch, including a journal called Neuroethics. They have conferences. There's all kinds of things that come up. So those are some applications. And Tuesday's last day of class, I'll talk about a few more applications there. you know, there's at least one of you who I'm going to meet with now. I actually probably have time to meet with 2 of you, you know, back to back if you want. You know, feel free to you know, email me a very rough penultimate, you know, early draft of just the first paragraph or whatever you want. I probably won't be emailing much this weekend, but don't freak out and panic about whether you get something to me by, you know, midnight on the end of Tuesday or something. I don't want anyone to get stressed out. I just, you know, would like to have some time to actually read what you send me. And I'm in the process of going through a list of, you know, if you haven't answered some of the old like mini questions, you know, you can dig out through your own email, find some of those, please send answers to those. And if you send in answers to all of those, and if you send in a project that sort of looks like it's doing what we've been talking about, then I'll be very happy. And, you know, so there's no magic to it. So anyway, so have a good weekend. I know it's Friday.
Yeah,
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, well, I'm going to move on to this chat for like
Oh, the first thing, yeah, I think the one of, like, one sent it in, and then the one for Connie's, like.
Oh, good.
This is like an observation.
Oh, okay.
They just sent it.
Okay.
They just scrambled.
There are some people here.